There are things you cannot be told. You can hear them. You can nod at them. You can even repeat them back to someone who needs to hear them. But they don't land. Not really, not in the place where things actually change you, until life has put you through the specific experience that makes them true. And somewhere around the middle of a human life, somewhere in the territory between who you thought you'd be by now and who you've actually become, those things begin to land. Not gently, like something that's been falling for years finally hitting the ground. This video is about those things, the lessons that no motivational quote, no self-help book, no well-meaning advice from someone who loved you could ever actually teach you. The ones that only come from living long enough to see the full arc of certain decisions, to watch certain patterns play out, to lose some things you thought were permanent and discover they weren't, to gain some things you never expected and discover those weren't what you thought they'd be either. If you're not 45 yet, pay very close attention, because what I'm about to share could save you a decade. And if you are, you already know what I mean, and it's time to name it. Here is what nobody prepares you for about getting older. The life lessons that matter most don't arrive on schedule. They don't come with a warning. They don't show up when you're ready for them in a form you can easily absorb and act on. They come late, dressed as regret, as loss, as the quiet afternoon when you sit down and realize that something you've been telling yourself for 20 years isn't actually true, and hasn't been for a long time. And the cruelest part is this. Most of these lessons were available to you earlier. Someone tried to teach you. Maybe a parent, maybe a book, maybe a moment of clarity that came and went too fast. But you weren't ready. Because readiness for the deepest lessons isn't about intelligence. It isn't about willingness. It's about having lived enough to understand what you're being taught. Here is the problem that creates. By the time you understand something important, really understand it in the cells of your body and the decisions you make without thinking, you may have already spent years living in contradiction to it. Years of chasing the wrong things, of loving people poorly because you hadn't yet learned how to love well, of wasting energy on battles that didn't matter and surrendering ground on things that did, of being governed by fears you never examined and desires you never questioned. The ancient philosophers had a word for this. They called it agnoia, the specific suffering that comes not from ignorance, but from not knowing that you don't know. The blind spot so complete that you can't see it's there. And there was one man in particular who spent his entire life studying what happens when a person finally sees past it, who mapped with extraordinary precision what shifts when a human being crosses from unconscious living to genuine wisdom. That man was Marcus Aurelius, and he came to his deepest understanding not in his youth, not in his education, but in his 40s. Governing an empire in crisis, watching the people he loved die, and writing alone at night the lessons that experience had finally slowly and painfully made undeniable. This is what he understood. It's 169 AD. Marcus Aurelius is 48 years old. He has spent the last 3 years on the front lines of a war that shows no sign of ending. He has watched a plague move through his empire and kill somewhere between 5 and 10 million people, including soldiers he commanded, citizens he was sworn to protect, and members of his own household. He has recently lost his co-emperor Lucius Verus, a man he trusted and ruled alongside for nearly a decade. He has buried children. He is in pain from a series of illnesses that he has managed without complaint for years. And he is, by any measure, exactly where he said he wanted to be when he was young. Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man in the known world, in command of the greatest military in human history, and in his private journals, the ones he wrote in the dark for no audience with no pretense, he doesn't write about power. He doesn't write about legacy. He doesn't write about victory. He writes about time, about the people he loves, about the smallness of his ambitions compared to the vastness of what matters, about how long it took him to understand things that now seem so obvious they almost hurt. He writes, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." He is writing about himself, about the years spent performing rather than living, about the version of himself that existed before experience made him honest. And then he writes something that will stop you completely if you let it. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He is not writing philosophy. He is writing a confession. A recognition, arrived at too slowly, that every obstacle he spent years trying to avoid was exactly where his real life was waiting for him. That is what 45 teaches. That the life you were avoiding, the difficult conversation, the uncomfortable truth, the path that looked too hard, was the life that would have made you. Here are the lessons that only the living of years can teach. Before the lessons, one foundational truth from Seneca that frames all of them. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it. He wrote that in his early 50s. After watching friend after friend squander the one non-renewable resource available to every human being equally. Not money, not talent, not opportunity. Time. And more specifically, attention. The quality of presence you bring to your actual life rather than the rehearsal of it. Every lesson that follows is ultimately a lesson about attention, about where you were pointing it, and where you wish, in retrospect, you had pointed it instead. Epictetus, who had the fewest external resources of any philosopher in the ancient world, said the clearest thing about this: "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." Not resignation, alignment. The understanding that a life spent fighting reality is a life spent fighting, and a life that can meet what is, including what is painful, what is irreversible, what is not what you planned, is a life that can finally move. These lessons teach you that alignment, not because someone explained them, because you lived long enough to need them. Lesson 1. Most of what you worried about never happened. Think about the thing that kept you up at night 5 years ago. The catastrophe you were certain was coming, the failure you were bracing for, the judgment you were dreading. How much of it arrived, and of the fraction that did? How much of it actually broke you as you feared it would? Almost none of it. Marcus Aurelius wrote constantly in his journals about the futility of anticipatory suffering, about how the mind, left unguarded, will manufacture disasters that exist only in the imagination, and then charge you the full emotional price as though they were real. By 45, you understand this in your body, not as a concept, as lived experience. You have been afraid of enough things that didn't happen to finally question whether the next fear deserves the power you're giving it. The practice. When the anxiety rises, ask, has my worry ever once prevented the thing I was worried about? Or has it only consumed the time I would have used to prepare for it? Worry is not preparation. It is suffering borrowed in advance for a debt that usually never comes due. Lesson 2. The people who love you quietly are worth more than the ones who perform it loudly. At 20, you wanted to be wanted by many people, visibly. You measured your worth in how large your circle appeared, how many invitations you received, how well you were received in rooms full of people you didn't know well. By 45, the circle is smaller, and you are grateful for it. Not because you've become antisocial, because you've learned to distinguish between people who show up and people who are there. between the friend who says all the right things in public and the one who calls without being asked when something is wrong, between the relationship that looks like connection and the one that actually is. Epictetus said, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." By 45, you know exactly who those people are. They are almost never the loudest ones, and the quiet grief of this lesson, the part that makes it land so heavily, is the years spent maintaining relationships that were never real, at the cost of deepening the ones that were. Lesson 3. Your body was sending signals you ignored. Listen now. In your 20s and 30s, the body absorbs everything. The bad sleep, the poor food, the stress carried in the shoulders for months without release. It absorbs and keeps performing, and then, without drama, without announcement, it stops absorbing quietly and starts speaking loudly. The ancients understood this relationship between the physical and the philosophical. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about the body as the instrument through which everything else is achieved, and about the obligation to maintain it not out of vanity but out of respect for the life it makes possible. By 45, this is no longer abstract. You understand, in a way you couldn't before, that the quality of your thinking, the patience in your relationships, the energy you bring to what matters, all of it runs on the physical foundation you've either built or neglected. The lesson: start now, not later, not when things slow down, not when you have more time. The body you have in your 60s is being decided right now. And the window to influence it is not closing slowly, it is closing. Lesson 4. Being right is almost never worth what you pay for it. You spent years being right, right in arguments that didn't matter, right at the cost of people who did, right in ways that won the point and lost the relationship, right in the way that feels briefly satisfying and then, in the quiet afterward, feels like nothing at all. Seneca wrote about the man who wins every debate and has no friends, who is technically correct about everything and genuinely connected to nothing, who has invested so heavily in being right that he has forgotten to be good. By 45, you understand that the most important conversations in your life are not the ones you won. They are the ones where you said less than you could have, listened more than felt natural, and chose the relationship over the verdict. The question that changes this: do I want to be right, or do I want to be close? In almost every case, you cannot fully have both. And by 45, you know which one leaves you with something that matters. Lesson 5. Time moves differently than you think, and then it moves faster. At 25, a decade feels endless. At 45, a decade feels like a season, not because time changes, because your relationship to it changes, because by 45 you have a decade behind you that you remember clearly. And the fact that it is already behind you, already finished, already immovable, produces a particular quality of attention that nothing else creates. Marcus Aurelius returned to this obsessively: the shortness of time, the irreversibility of it, not as a morbid preoccupation but as a practical tool for clarity, as the thing that, when held clearly in mind, makes the trivial trivial and the essential essential with almost no effort. He wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." By 45, you understand why this is not advice. It is necessity, because the past cannot be revised and the future cannot be controlled, and the present, this hour, this conversation, this small and ordinary moment, is the only place anything real can happen. The lesson: the urgency you felt in your youth was often pointed at the wrong things. The real urgency, the one that matters, is this: the present moment is the only place your life actually lives. Don't spend it rehearsing or reviewing. Spend it here. Lesson 6. What you didn't say was often more important than what you did. The words that caused the most damage in your life were rarely the ones you labored over. They were the ones you said without thinking, in anger, in defensiveness, in the moment when you had a choice between honesty and precision, and chose the version that felt better to say rather than the version that was actually true. And the words that mattered most, the ones that might have changed things, opened things, healed things, were often the ones you decided against. Too vulnerable, too uncertain of the reception, too much to risk for an outcome you couldn't guarantee. Socrates spent his life asking questions he didn't know the answers to. And in doing so, he created more genuine connection, more real, lasting understanding between human beings than any speech he could have delivered. By 45, you understand the weight of unspoken things, the relationship that could have been repaired if you'd made the call, the person who needed to hear something from you that you kept to yourself, the version of events you never corrected because correcting it felt too complicated. The lesson: say the thing, not carelessly, not without thought, but with the understanding that the silence that feels safe in the short term often becomes the heaviest thing you carry long term. Lesson 7. The life you were building toward is already here. You just kept missing it. This is the one that hits the hardest, because you spent years oriented toward the future. When I get there, when I achieve that, when the circumstances finally align, and the conditions are finally right, and the version of me I've been working toward finally arrives, then the life begins. And somewhere in your 40s you look up, and you realize, with a combination of relief and grief that is unlike any other feeling, that the life was always here, that the Tuesday evenings you rushed through were your life, that the ordinary meals, the forgettable conversations, the unremarkable mornings, those were it. Those were the accumulation of the thing you were waiting to begin. Marcus Aurelius wrote, to himself, alone, in the dark, loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight. He wasn't writing about acceptance. He was writing about recognition. The recognition that life is not the extraordinary moments, it is the texture of ordinary days, and that the ability to be fully present in ordinary days, to find them sufficient, to find them real, to find them worth the full quality of your attention, is not a small achievement. It is the achievement. It is what everything else was building toward. By 45, you understand that the destination you were racing toward was always where you were standing. The lesson: begin living the life you have, not the one you're planning, not the one you're building toward. This one, with the people already in it, in the circumstances already present, in the ordinary Tuesday that is happening right now and will not happen again. Here is what changes when these lessons finally land. You stop performing your life and start living it. You stop managing your image and start building your character. You stop pursuing the version of success that was handed to you and start asking, genuinely, for perhaps the first time, what you actually want, what actually matters, what you would choose if the choosing were entirely yours. You stop being afraid of the people who judge you, because you've lived long enough to watch judgment age, to see how little the opinions of others determine the actual quality of a life, to understand that the people whose opinions once felt like verdicts are, themselves, just trying to figure it out. You start choosing depth over breadth, one real conversation over 10 performed ones, one genuine relationship over a curated network of appearances, 1 hour of genuine presence over a day of distracted busyness, and perhaps most importantly, you develop a relationship with time that is not panicked but not passive either. You understand, at last, that urgency and presence are not opposites, that the awareness of life's shortness does not have to produce anxiety. It can produce, instead, a quality of attention, a precision of investment, a refusal to waste the irreplaceable on the inconsequential. Marcus Aurelius. At 48, exhausted, grief-laden, governing an empire in crisis, wrote one final line in his journal that captures all of this in a way no analysis can improve on. When you arise in the morning, think of what a privilege it is to be alive, to think, to enjoy, to love, not in spite of everything, because of it, because the morning exists, because you are in it, because you still have time. The lessons that change everything don't arrive at 20, or 25, or 30. They arrive when you've lived enough to need them, when the consequences of not knowing them have become real enough to teach you in the way that nothing else can. But here is what I want you to take from this video. Whether you are 22 or 47, you do not have to wait. The lessons are available now, not as full-lived understanding that comes only with time, but as a direction, a heading, a way of orienting yourself toward the life that the deepest part of you already knows it wants to build. Stop waiting for the version of you that has it all figured out. That version is built from the inside, from choices made today, in ordinary moments, and with imperfect information and incomplete understanding. By 45, you finally understand that the life was always happening, that it was never waiting for your arrival. You were always already in it. The only question was whether you were paying attention. If this video landed somewhere real, if one of these lessons is still moving through you, don't let it evaporate. Write it down. One lesson. The one that hit hardest. And ask yourself, honestly, without defense, how much of your current life reflects that understanding? Subscribe to this channel, because every week we do this. We take the deepest wisdom in human history and translate it into the most usable form possible for the actual life you are living right now. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this with someone who is still oriented toward a life they haven't started living yet. Because the next video is going to say something about where your time is actually going that you are not ready to hear, and need to hear anyway. Don't miss it.